So, I mean, I think many of us know how SMEs are being affected in the pandemic, but I mean, how are local economies dependent on SMEs, and what are the key issues regarding getting the digital economy right to support the recovery and survival of all these small, medium-sized businesses that unfortunately many of us in our hometown, certainly for me in Washington, D.C., are seeing shut down right now?
Yeah, that's a great question. And there's, I think, 3 or 4 different angles to this. One, Rhonda touched on, right? And that is engagement with policymakers, right? In the U.S. alone, and I hate to keep criticizing it, but we've undertaken some tremendous failures here. In the recovery itself, specific to COVID and the pandemic, it is dominated by large businesses. The actual recovery consortia that has been engaged by the federal government has very few small businesses in it. Now, contrast that with the fact that 99% of all U.S. companies are small, medium enterprises. So how can we, chart the path to forward growth and economic recovery when you have the vast majority of those impacted not part of the policymaking dialogue? They are, and you look at the chambers as well, the vast majority of the membership are large enterprises. They're not small, medium enterprises. So that's one. The engagement strategy has to change to one that is actually more representative of the economy. The second is in digitization as a matter of infrastructure. To date, we continue to look at infrastructure in very legacy and traditional ways, right? Roads, bridges, electrics, broadband, digital access, especially in rural communities, even in the United States, right? One of the most developed nations where you think everyone's got a smartphone. You still have rural parts of this country that do not have any reliable access to broadband. And if everyone now has gone to a remote learning environment, at least in part, if not wholly, you have a number of kids, a number of school children that are completely without access to their education. And I'm talking at the primary school all the way to the high school level, let alone university and beyond, right? So critical infrastructure must, as a matter of priority, include digitization and digital resources, hardware, software, broadband, and the like, so that digital exclusion is addressed from a critical infrastructure perspective. The third is in the context of SMEs being part of the solution set. And this is where, near and dear to my heart, the financial technology sector plays an important role, right? So if you think about small and medium enterprises dependent on whether they be government stimulus programs or support programs, too often their inability to be financially accessible forces governments to go back to very antiquated tools. Take the US as another example. We were looking at the distribution of prepaid cards and hard checks to individuals and small businesses. I mean, just think about the fraud, leakage, and waste alone in that, let alone the ability to provide those support services in meaningful ways explicitly to small and medium enterprises. And the final piece is, and it was touched on a little bit by Anthea, certainly by Rhonda and Lourdes, is that community engagement now needs to be the central of attention. Communities, right? Because in the pandemic, we have seen community organizations and affiliation groups are the center for vital services. So faith-based organizations, churches, houses of worship, synagogues, temples, etc., right, are places for food distribution, are places for resources. Education, our public schools are equal parts places for education, but for many parts of our economy and some of the rural sectors, including my hometown here in Vermont, is that you have 60+% of the individuals, the kids, getting their food at least 2 meals, if not 3 meals a day from their school. So schools become an important food distribution as well as caregiving for individuals. And so if now you're forced with families that are forced to work remotely, how can they balance that? And so these centers of community engagement need to be tapped in ways much like Anthea was saying. And we have digital tools to do so. Online and social fora that can now create a much greater and secure strategy for engagement with those community groups as points of distribution and resources, as well as engagement for thoughts on how to provide those resources and what the real choke points and pain points are for small and medium enterprises. And again, notwithstanding 65 plus million businesses that are official micro businesses in the world, right? And so you think about this is the center of the new economy, and it's not really new. This has been in existence and it's just been exacerbated by what we've seen in the pandemic. And so I think those 3-4 areas are areas that if we put a concerted view and set of resources to as a priority, I think we can make a real dent in this in a sustainable way.